Hello, and welcome to episode 511 of the Unauthorized History of the Pacific War podcast. My name is Seth Paridon, historian and deputy director of the Mississippi Armed Forces Museum, and with me, as always, is my co-host, esteemed author and historian, John Parshall. Good buddy, John Parshall, how are you today?
Esteemed author. That seems awfully highfalutin. I don't know.
Well, you know what?
Author.
If you don't let other people toot your own horn, you can't toot your own horn.
Yes,
Because
yeah.
then you look like a tool. So it's like, you just take it when it comes.
Also true. My wife doesn't want me tooting my horn. She just keep the head as little expanded as possible. Anyway.
Exactly. I can't hardly get through the door myself. But anyway, that's
Right.
besides the point. All right. So before we get started on today's topic, footage exploration, there is something that we wanted to bring up, that you wanted to bring up, John, that an astute viewer when we did our Pearl Harbor newsreel stuff, had some really cool observations. So I'm going to pull this footage up right now. This is, by the way, is for those who want to know, this is reel number 242, MID 299, reel 2. So anyway, John, take it away. What is it that we want to talk about here?
Got an email from a viewer, a guy named Nelson Wong in Hong Kong, and he actually did some very good sleuthing work on what we were actually looking at here, and then went out, which I could have done, to my website combinedfleet.com and pulled the troms of some of these vessels. But I just wanted to go back through this really quickly and add some additional detail that we didn't have when we did it the first time. So thank you, Nelson. Anyway, so this is the Japanese naval force that is going to be assisting in the Hong Kong operation. This is actually led by the light cruiser Isuzu. And this is undoubtedly on Isuzu's deck right here. You can see her mast there in the background. So we got troops lining up to do their thing. We've already been through this. So Isuzu comes in with a group of destroyers and also some motor torpedo boats. There's a squadron from the 15th. This is an E7N ALF. I misidentified it as a Jake. It ain't a Jake. It's an E7N. So this is an earlier model scouting plane that was carried. I can't tell. This looks like it's actually on Isuzu, but there was also the Kamikawa Maru was involved in this operation, which is a seaplane tender that had a couple of these Kawanishi E7Ks, and also a trio of Yokosuka B3Y Type 92 torpedo attack planes. So they did have some, a little bit of air cover here too, along with, this assortment of gunboats and more motor torpedo boats and whatnot. Let's keep rolling here. So we're going to launch this ALF. Goodbye, ALF. Go off and do your thing. Got our troops going down into the boats. And it seems to me that a lot of what's happening here, that this is actually footage that is being taken. Okay, so this is clearly a Japanese light cruiser. That is a Isuzu. Now that we actually know what her trom is. Yeah. This is going to be of the landings that are actually taking place on Hong Kong Island. So this is the very last part of the battle itself. And that's what the remainder of this footage is going to be. This is actually a very fiercely fought action. That the British had retreated to the island in the aftermath of having lost the gin drinkers line in Kowloon. And then the Japanese had to, they asked for the surrender of the island, and the British said nope. And so they had to go. Okay, so this is Stonecutter Island. And at the time, it actually was an island. Now it is physically connected to Kowloon by a bridge. But at the time, there was a radio intercept station here, and there were a number of quick-firing 6-inch guns. And so the Japanese would obviously have needed to eliminate those emplacements as a prelude to then launching the invasion of Hong Kong Island, which you can see in the background here, I believe. Which is going to be the final fight. So one of our ALFs doing its thing.
Here's your task force.
Yep, their task force. So this, if you pause it here, we were like, oh, it looks like dockyards. Well, yeah, they're dockyards. These are actually, this is the Taiku dock. So at the time, there were 3 main dockyards in Hong Kong, and in order of their capacity, it was the Whampoa, then the Taiku, and then the Admiralty dock. And so this dockyard is actually on Hong Kong Island. So it would have been attacked during the initial portions of the invasion of the island itself. Right. It no longer exists. It's now a housing development. And there's been a lot of infill of various land areas around Hong Kong and Kowloon. But that's what this was. This is the Taiku dock.
You see a dry dock right here, too.
Yes, sir. Yep. And they could build ships here. They built steamers and that sort of thing. The smoke is coming from the Asiatic Petroleum Company, which also is located on the north side of the island of Hong Kong. And so Asiatic Petroleum was the second largest employer in Hong Kong at this point. It's a joint venture between Shell and Royal Dutch. And the fire was started by Japanese artillery shelling. And the Japanese then used this smoke as a cover for doing the landings that were going to happen on the eastern side of North Point on Hong Kong Island. So this is fighting that's taking place on the island itself, albeit some of it is definitely staged.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
anyway.
Good.
Yeah, no, that's actually pretty much what I wanted to get through. I was just to add a little extra detail here, because I didn't realize that this footage was actually taking place on Hong Kong Island itself. I had thought it was actually down in Kowloon, but no, this is the final battle that is taking place to capture Hong Kong Island and then end British resistance before the entire place is taken over. So kind of interesting. Just wanted to go back and say, hey, we're always learning here. Thank you, Nelson, for sending us a very detailed email and for doing that homework. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, and that's incredibly important to add too. Is we're I'd venture to say we're pretty good at what we do, but we're not perfect, and there are people that are far more versed in certain aspects of the war than we are, and it's cool. And as you always say, it takes a village, and
right.
The fact that we have
or a hive mind,
yeah, so the fact that we have such a astute audience.
Yep.
is very, very helpful, frankly, and because we don't know everything, good Lord, you can't. It's impossible. So, but no, yeah, thank you, Nelson, and every other body that was our first footage foray, if you will. And by the time this airs, we've already done another, and obviously we're doing this one. So we're slowly getting better at this particular aspect of the broadcast. But what we're going to do today, aside from the addendum that we just put on here at the beginning of this episode, is we're going to look at some really cool footage. There are several instances during World War II in the Pacific that are just iconic. And, you think of, obviously Pearl Harbor, Midway, Iwo, Tarawa, places like that. The Doolittle Raid is like way up there in the stratosphere of iconic Pacific War actions. And no, this is not the episode on the Doolittle Raid. We're going to do that. This ain't it. This is what it says. This is the Headquarters Air Corps Proving Grounds at Eglin Field, Florida. This is essentially what I call in my records the Doolittle Raid home movie. And the reason for that is it's pretty obvious why, as you're going to see, because it was filmed by one dude and his crew, a guy named Dick Joyce. And these are the B-25s at Eglin. Not long after Doolittle gives the orders to form this group of volunteers and bring them down to Eglin for training.
Right.
So, and you're gonna see the old man here in just a few minutes. Now, you're gonna see throughout this section, particularly, and another one when we get to the launch point, tail numbers. These are the serial numbers of the aircraft that flew in the raid. Some of them are easy to distinguish, some of them aren't. And if you can distinguish someone that I can't, please let me know, because my eyes are good, but they're not as good as they used to be. So it is what it is.
Yeah.
But as you know, as most people know anything about the raid, you know, this is where the major portion of their pre-raid training took place, was at Eglin Field, and then at Ellison Field as well. This is where the Navy comes into play, is at Ellison Field. But they're based off of initially here at Eglin, and this is where they do their primary training. This is where all the different units come together, the different recon squadrons and all this other jazz, and the bombing squadrons and bomb groups, they coalesce here at Eglin. And this is where they start forming the nucleus of the raiders that are going to participate. Cool. This guy right here, just clowning around.
Yeah.
This guy is the co-pilot. And this is, we got to see that again because that's just cool. I'm sorry. He's just acting a fool. Right. This is J. Royden Stork is the guy's name. He's the co-pilot for Dick Joyce and crew number 10. Okay. Dick Joyce is the one that's operating this camera. And the reason I know this is A, you'll see him in a minute, but B, I had the privilege of interviewing a lot of raiders, one of which was Davy Jones. And I brought this footage with me to Jones's house when he lived in Arizona. And I said, hey, can you help identify any of these people? And he's like, I don't know. Let me see it. Play it. And I played it. And he's like, yep, that's this guy. He knew them all. He knew all these guys.
Yeah. That's so cool.
Jones was freaking cool. He was an amazing guy. We'll talk about him in a little bit. But yeah, these are some of the ground crew, obviously. And again, if people are watching this, there are people that are like uber Doolittle Raid nerds. If you can identify some of these people, shout them out, because I hate to say it, the enlisted men, Dave really didn't know them very well. He knew his guy, but he didn't know any of the other ones. So if you can identify any of these people, or this officer here, or this one here, for that matter, shout it out. Let us know, because I'd love to know. I'd love to know. So what you're seeing here, obviously, the B-25s, they're under this Dick Joyce right here.
Okay.
So this is Joyce.
So now, is this the field where they had, made the outlines of the flight deck, or is that the next field that they're going to be going to?
That is the next field. That's Ellison Field is where they do that. And that's where, and you're going to see him in the footage later, and we'll talk about him. Henry Miller, Lieutenant Henry Miller, is a United States naval officer. He's a naval aviator. This is where he comes into play. And yes, to answer your question, it's not here, it's at Ellison, but yeah, that's where that takes place. Okay. And it's a pretty interesting story about Miller. We've actually talked about him before, and we can talk about him a little bit here later on. But yeah, this is Dick Joyce flying his aircraft, or at the very least sitting in the cockpit.
Yeah.
It's
just as a total aside, anybody that's ever been around a B-25 or been in a B-25, when they are fired up, though, they're just deafeningly loud. Just holy Moses. In fact, I'm going to be going to the Commemorative Air Force's hangar dance here in another couple days over in St. Paul, and they've got a B-25 there, and they bring it out at halftime of the dance every time, and it's just, when they fire that puppy up, it's just so freaking loud. Anybody who flew any missions in these things, how they had any hearing left at the end of it, I have no idea. But anyway, it's a very cool plane.
Huh? What'd you say? What?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. They're neat airplanes, though. The 25s are freaking cool. They're cool birds.
Very forgiving. Good plane.
Yeah.
I'm a closet B-26 fan myself. I do have a thing for the Marauder, but it was a much less forgiving airframe than the 25 was. That's for sure.
And what's neat about this is that you'll actually see 26s in the background of some of these shots.
Okay.
Because they were stationed there at Eglin. I don't know what group they were. I'm sure somebody can tell me. I have no clue. Okay. But they were there, and they're the early B-26s. Right. Very, very early. So just to give a little bit of background, the aircraft this is Joyce here, sitting in the cockpit of his B-25. The serial number on this one's 2250. As I said, he was crew number 10. He was the pilot of crew number 10. They were obviously the 10th aircraft to take off of the USS Hornet. They had 1 cluster incendiary and 3 demo bombs. Their target was Kawasaki, the Kanagawa era of Kawasaki specifically. And what's cool about this particular bird, the one that he's sitting in right now, is that this was slated to actually be, for lack of a better term, a demonstration airplane. What they were going to do was use this specific aircraft to take off of the Hornet once the Hornet got out about 100 miles out from the coast, just to ease the minds of the pilots that, like, look, this can be done. And the guy that was going to take off in it was Hank Miller, the naval aviator, because he was supposed to turn around and fly back to South Carolina and not go on the raid. But as we know, he does go on the raid. He doesn't make the flight, but he gets aboard Hornet. That's another story for another time. Okay. But this aircraft was supposed to do that, but it had a mechanical, and it didn't do that. So the demo flight was scrubbed. What happens next is that Joyce obviously the aircraft gets fixed. He takes this airplane into Japan, and this is the airplane that is the heaviest. It receives the most amount of damage done to it by the Japanese themselves. It's attacked by no less than 9 Japanese aircraft.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it takes a pretty fair licking. Let's see, he gets... Yeah, he takes very heavy anti-aircraft fire. He's attacked by 9 fighters. It was the only plane to suffer major damage over Japan, several holes in the fuselage, of which one was 8 inches around. It's pretty big.
That's not what you want to see. Yeah.
No, not at all. Not an aluminum aircraft for sure. They wind up getting to China, and his crew does bail out. Local Chinese assist him and his crew, and they wind up getting out to Chushin in 4 days. And Joyce and several of these raiders, the myth has always been they're all pulled back home. That's not the case. A lot of these guys, including Joyce and his crew, wind up staying in China and flying missions out of China for the remainder of the war.
Oh, wow. Okay. Know that. Yeah.
So this is, as I said, this is Big Joyce. So we can look how young he is.
I know.
He looks like a kid.
Yeah.
Looks like a freaking kid. Yeah, this is some of the activities on the field. And again, I don't know who the hell this guy is.
Right. Yeah.
I have no idea.
He's very Natalie attired. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know who he is. I don't know if he's one of the raiders, if he's a buddy. I don't know what the heck he's doing, or aside from sucking on the cancer stick there, I don't know what he's doing. And again, if somebody knows, again, this is Joyce here. So, but yeah, this is neat stuff.
Yeah, the Doolittle Raid home movie. I like that.
Yeah, I don't know what else to call it. So to my knowledge, it did not have an actual narrow reel number. And if it did, it's been assigned it in the last 10 years, because it didn't when I got it. And that's what I just called it, the Doolittle Raid home movie. So you'll see various stages of things going on in the background here. There's your B-26 right there. Or no, it's not. I'm sorry, that's a B-25.
No, that's another Mitchell.
Yeah, it's another Mitchell. But yeah. Okay, so this aircraft.
Yeah, I was just wondering about that.
2249. Back it up so you can see the nose. Of course, there's no nose art on it yet, but there will be, and it's actually one of the more famous shots. This is going to be crew number 11. And by the way, Joyce, this airplane, and one of the other airplanes that we're going to see all came out of the 89th Recon Squadron. So it would make sense that Joyce or Stork, who's ever operating the camera at the time, is going to take pictures of their airplanes, because these are their buddies. They know these guys. That, like, they've worked and trained with these guys for well over a year now. So they're taking pictures of their friends. And this is the airplane, as I said, crew number 11. It's going to be piloted by Hoss Greening, and the nickname is Harry Carrier, K-A-R-I-E-R, and it's the one, the nose art with the angel flying, holding the bomb. We've all seen the image before.
Okay, right.
Yeah, and that, I don't know when they put the nose art on it. It's very evident that
it ain't there yet.
It ain't there yet. Something was here, but it's not there, because you could see it if it was. And it is on there when it's on the Hornet, but that's one of the more famous nose art images of the aircraft. Greening's bomber, this one particular 2249, as it crossed over into Japanese airspace, Greening kind of got a little bit lost, if you will, and wound up inadvertently flying over an active Japanese air base that had that had aircraft in the landing pattern. And all of a sudden, this B-25 just boom right through their landing pattern And apparently he came through so damn fast that the Japanese were like, what the hell was that?
Right.
They didn't know what the hell that was.
Oh my goodness.
That could have been bad. That could have been really, really bad. So when they come out of there, one of the trailing Japanese aircraft in the landing pattern does decide to try and chase him down. The tail gunner squeezes off a few shots, and the Japanese pilot says nope, and he turns around and gets the hell out of there. This crew as well bombs Nagoya, the Aichi factory in Nagoya. They wound up hitting that target with 4 cluster incendiary bombs, and they wound up bailing out over China and making their way to friendly lines as well. They actually reached the same place that Joyce's crew does too. They wound up there at the exact same time afterwards. Chushin.
Some sort of a trainer or something behind them.
Yeah, I don't know what the hell that was. Probably looked like an AT-6, probably. Okay, so
good eye.
Everybody knows who this guy is.
Yeah, there he is, the man.
The old man. Yeah. Jimmy Doolittle himself. What I find to be cool about this, aside from the fact that that's freaking Jimmy Doolittle, who was a legend before this raid. Look at the faces on these dudes. They're all got this like, whoa.
Right. Yeah.
Because these guys grew up hearing about this dude, you know?
Yeah.
All these guys grew up hearing about his exploits, you know, before the war. So he was legitimately a hero to a lot of these guys. And he was a hot stick, man. He was a badass pilot. There's no question.
Yeah. Did you know him at all?
I did not.
Didn't meet him?
I never had the opportunity to meet Doolittle, no. Unfortunately, he passed away before I got into that cycle.
Yeah.
But, it's very unfortunate I did not. I wished I had. But amazing. Yeah, so and that's what we were trying to figure out yesterday. I had my arms and vehicle conservator in here yesterday looking at this footage with me. Yeah. I think what they're doing is bleeding the brakes.
Oh, okay.
I think so. Because you can see the rubber hose here, and they're obviously doing something with the hydraulics. I'm going to assume that it's bleeding the brakes, but
We're making it so the wheel doesn't fall off.
Pretty much.
Carry on, man. Make that happen, yeah.
And again, this cat here in the glasses, don't know who the heck he is. If anybody knows who he is, please let me know. I think it's just a dude cheesing in an airplane, but I could be dead wrong. And this is why I said it looks like they're bleeding the brakes here. And again, if there's a B-25 note on here, it can tell me exactly. Please let me know.
Yeah.
All right. So, hold on. Let's go. The man wiping his eye. All right. This is obviously Jimmy Doolittle here. This dude here took me a little minute to figure out who this cat was. Very young-looking major. You can see his oak leaves right there. This is... I just had his damn name. This is Jack Hilger is his name. Major Jack Hilger. He's coming from the 89th Recon Squadron, which is also the squadron of Joyce and Hoss Greening. So all these people knew one another. Hilger was chosen by Doolittle to be his second in command of the entire Doolittle raid. So if Doolittle's sick, or something happens to him or whatever, Hilger was going to actually, and it would be called the Hilger Raid, not the Doolittle Raid. He was recommended by his commanding officer as to be the most sound, like straight arrow, razor sharp guy in the entire group. And Doolittle took, I can't remember the 89th Recon Squadron's commanding officer's name, but Doolittle took his word for it and assigns Hilger, and of course Hilger does a fantastic job. Hilger, even though he's second in command, he is going to fly the raid. He's going to fly in crew number 14. So he's the third to last to take off of Hornet. He's also going to hit Nagoya, the Aichi factory, with 4 cluster incendiaries. His crew is going to safely bail out inside of China. They also, oddly enough, reach Chushin, the same place as Dick Joyce and Hoss Greening. They all are clustered in these areas. And he stays in China for a little while, and then he winds up going to fly missions in Europe. So Hilger is he's a pretty he sees a lot of action, shall we say?
Yeah.
I just think this is so cool. This reel is so neat because it just shows this aspect of the raid that I would be willing to bet not a lot of people have seen before. Maybe you have, but
no, I've never seen this. This is really cool.
So some more B-25s. Da, 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 da. I swear there was a 26 in here. Maybe I'm losing my mind.
Yeah, we'll see.
There's several aircraft here.
That's a great shot.
Yeah. And dudes just working on the aircraft wheels themselves, getting everything ready to go. And they were flying constant training missions out of Eglin too. So I mean, they weren't just sitting there, hanging
Twiddling
out.
their thumbs, right.
Yeah, not at all. They're flying formation, they're flying low altitude, low level flights, they're doing all kinds of things. And of course, anytime you take a bird up, it requires significant maintenance.
Sure.
This one here, number 2278, and you're going to see some of these airplanes later on in the footage of them launching. This is going to be crew number 12. It comes from the 37th Bomb Squadron. It's flown by a gentleman named Lieutenant William Bauer. It's crew number 12, so it's the 12th airplane to take off a Hornet, 1 cluster incendiary, 3 high explosives, and it also bombs Kawasaki Kanagawa. So it's also one of those myths, that everything hit Tokyo.
No.
It did not.
Yeah, they were all over.
Oh, there you go. There's your 26.
Oh, yeah, there we are.
Yeah.
What a beautiful
I knew it was in there, by God.
You are right. Yeah.
That's an early one, though, man. I can't even see a turret on here at all. This is a very early bird.
Yeah, that's an early model, all right. But it'll still kill you if you don't fly it right.
Yeah. Cool airplane nonetheless. There's that famous footage in Europe of one of those things taking a hit in the wing root. You ever seen that?
Yes.
And it just disintegrates right there.
That's terrifying. Yeah. And yet, the B-26 had a overall lower attrition rate though than your typical medium bomber in 8th Air Force. So good plane, but not very forgiving, particularly if you get an engine stall and takeoff. Just doesn't have enough wing area. That's neat. And
it's interesting to note too when we talk about the raid. And again, we'll get into the Doolittle Raid itself once we do an episode on the Doolittle Raid in the future, is that there were several aircraft considered for the raid. It wasn't always going to be the B-25. The B-26 was actually one of the aircrafts that was considered to be used in the raid, but it just came out for multiple reasons, not the least of which is that there were A, more B-25s, and B, there were more people that were qualified B-25s to fly the Mitchell. And that's one of the reasons that it was chosen to do.
I just have to think that from trying to get a 2-engine bomber off a short runway, man, I'd much rather do that in a Mitchell than a Marauder.
Yeah.
Yikes.
I would agree. Yeah. I would
All
agree.
right. So now we're done with Elgin, right?
Yeah.
And
we're done.
Now we're at sea.
We are at sea. And if you remember the last episode we did like this, we featured John Ford and all the stuff he shot. And the closing scene in that episode was what we deemed to be, and accurately so, the Doolittle Raid Task Force leaving to do their thing.
It's Enterprise's task force leaving from Pearl to head north of Hawaii to rendezvous with Hornet, which has come directly out from the West Coast. Correct. So those two forces are going to meet up north of Hawaii, and then they're going to go and head over towards Japan. And
this is a continuation of that footage, because this is John Ford himself shooting this. This is the USS Salt Lake City, the old swayback Maru.
Yep.
Let's skip back just a smidgen.
Yep.
Here's the Big E.
Yep.
And you'll be able to tell later when Hornet comes in the picture. It's pretty obvious.
Pretty obvious.
Yeah.
You'll notice the seas are not calm in the North Pacific.
Oh, and just you wait, my friend. Just wait. Just wait. Some of this footage, it'll make you seasick just watching it.
Yeah.
So this DD, I don't know which one this one is. Again, she had several that were surrounding her. You'll see a shot of one later on that's USS Benham. But I tried to identify some of these ships, but without being able to see the hull numbers on them, it was dang near impossible.
Yep.
But again, this is interesting. You look, this is April 1942, and these dudes are wearing pea coats. And gloves. And it's cold out there.
It's cold. Yeah, it's the Northern Pacific.
So yeah, so they're moving through here. No idea what any of those signal flags mean. I'm sorry, I'm not a sailor. I don't know.
Send the ice cream.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, this is Benham. This is USS Benham. DD 397 here, pulling up alongside the old sway back. But yeah, the water is not exactly, this is not a pond.
No.
SOCs, these are little Seagull scouting aircraft, all heavy cruisers carried them. Now we're moving in. The footage goes from color to black and white, and there are color reels of this. I don't have them. There are color reels of this footage. All I have is black and white, and the only color reels that are available of the same stuff, again, this is all filmed by Ford, is that it's deteriorated over time to where it's atrocious, unfortunately. But the black and white versions of the same footage are actually quite clear. So that's what we got here. All right, there's the Hornet. So now you can see, we'll back up here. Swayback Maru was part of Enterprise's task force. So here's the Big E right here. The task groups have coalesced into one, and now there's Hornet over here.
Yep.
And now we're moving on to the coast of Japan. And Ford's just trying to he's just trying to pan across the task force here in the show. And it's important to note, and you'll see some of this later, and we cut some of the footage out of this particular episode because it's much like anything with the Navy related footage, it's out of sequence, and it shows a lot of different things happening. Enterprise had the duty during the entire raid until Hornet launched, for obvious reasons, because their deck's full of B-25s.
Right.
And the Big E had at that time aboard her VB-3, which is going to be the same unit. Of course, it's going to be attached to Yorktown during the Battle of Midway. VB-3 and VB-6 are on USS Enterprise, flying combat air patrol, anti-submarine patrol, things like that.
Yep.
Yeah, these are the SOCs. This is USS Salt Lake City. I want to point this out. That wind is kicking.
Yeah. Yeah, that flag's a little worse for wear.
Yeah. It has shredded Old Glory.
Yeah.
You know, we've talked about refueling, unreps many, many times. And this is one of those instances right here. This is USS Sabine, AO-25. And I remember Bill talking about when underway replenishments were, going on, the cacophony of water and friction and everything that's going on between the two ships. This is very evident here. Check this stuff out. And again, the water's already rough, but just look at everything that's going on in between here.
Right. Yep, sending stuff over via line. Yeah, the well decks on these oilers were not safe places to work because they didn't have a lot of freeboard, and you could get boarding seas and people would go overboard, and it was pretty dangerous stuff.
Yeah, I mean, that water is not calm in any way, shape, or form.
No.
And to also, to emphasize the danger of all this, all these lines that are being passed from Sabine to Salt Lake City, these are all done via manpower. And you just saw those guys just wailing on those lines to bring that stuff across there.
Yeah, Sal Mercogliano would have a lot of things to say about that footage, I'm sure. Oh, wow.
Yeah. So this is the task forces heading out, and there's Enterprise there. She's obviously conducting flight operations. You can see the bird coming in. What looks like she's about to try and get into the landing pattern. The footage jumps around. John Ford had a particular affinity for Salt Lake City's bow.
Yes. I saw that. Let's have another dramatic shot of her bow plunging into waves. Yeah,
you see it over and over and over again. The SOC flying here again. I'm assuming this is going to be Salt Lake City's aircraft, and the reason I say this is because she's going to come up and land here in a minute. But it wasn't just Enterprise that was flying scouting operations. It was these cruisers as well. You see Enterprise launching here, but the duty carrier had other duties assigned than just what they were doing: combat air patrol and anti-submarine patrol. The cruiser scout planes, which is this guy who's performing a
big jump. The first definitely got a bounce there,
Yeah, watch
and
this.
This was a fairly standard maneuver. If you're landing a float plane, the cruiser would make a donut in the water because its wake would actually be calmer than the surrounding seas, and you can see that this SOC is using that wake as a calmer patch of water to be putting down, and then even with that is taking a really big hop as soon as it touches down.
Well, look at this right here. That you can tell that's choppy water.
Yeah,
and then right here is her wake, and I mean it's not glass, but it's smoother than what's out there.
They sometimes would even release a little bit of fuel oil as well, because the oil would also have a calming effect on the water.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
But yeah, she takes a pretty good hit. Boom. Right there.
Yeah.
And we talk about naval aviators, of which these guys were. And when you think of naval aviators, you think of carrier pilots. Well, these guys had balls of solid rock too, because to be able to land that thing in the water, what you just saw was probably a very good landing, frankly.
Yeah.
And that takes a special kind of dude to do that kind of operation consistently, mind you. All right. Now here we are aboard Hornet. This is
2268.
Okay, so this aircraft has a significant history. 2268, of which this was aircraft flown. It was named Bat Out of Hell, was the name of the airplane. It was flown by a pilot named William Farrow, and his co-pilot was one Robert Height. This is the last B-25. This is crew number 16. This is the last B-25 to take off of USS Hornet. And about an hour after she begins launching, this is when Height and his boys, or Farrow and his boys and Height, take off. This is the airplane that is shot down, the crew is captured by the Japanese. We're gonna see them in footage here in a few minutes. You're gonna see Robert Height. You're gonna see some of this crew in Japanese footage of the captured, American terror bombers or whatever they want to call them. These guys bomb oil storage tanks and an aircraft factory, despite being attacked by Japanese fighters. They then head towards China, and due to low fuel, Farrow instructs his crew to get out. He knows that they're never going to make it over there. They bail out. Within an hour of landing on the ground, they're captured by the Japanese almost immediately. Boom. They're captured by the Japanese. Two of Farrow's crew, including Farrow himself, Technical Sergeant Harold Spatz and William Farrow, are executed by the Japanese not long after they're captured. I want to say just a couple of months after they're captured. So you're going to see a lot of footage of this stuff here too. What they're doing is they're walking these props. And again, I'm not a pilot, but from what I recall being told, that a lot of times when they were doing this, they're cycling the oil through the engine. They're making sure that the compression in the engines is still there, because they're not
the oil. Right. And the oil has a tendency to pool in the lower cylinders. And so, by manually walking that around, I can see that you're redistributing the engine oil.
Yeah. And they're doing that several times a day. They do crank up the birds every now and then, but they're not flying because they can't land. They're not landing on Hornet. So this is obviously shots of them on the Hornet, firing their engines up, running everything up, testing everything out before they, several days before they get to their launching point. And I think it's also interesting too, is that, while Hornet had, and they're just doing PT out on the bow.
Yeah.
But while Hornet had obviously a complete, hangar deck crew, The maintenance of the Army aircraft is left to the Army ground crews.
Right.
It's left to the Army crews. Those are soldiers that are doing that maintenance, that are walking those props, that are taking care of everything here.
Yeah.
Those aren't Blue Jackets. All right. So who are these guys here? I don't know who these two are, and I don't know who this is, but this is obviously Jimmy Doolittle here.
Mm-hmm.
And he's talking to this cat right here. And this dude right here is my old friend, David M. Jones, Davy Jones. That's Davy right there. Davy was pilot of crew number 5, and we're actually going to see footage of him launching. And I can't help but think of the one time when I interviewed him. I interviewed him once, and we brought him to the World War II Museum 2 or 3 times, and I interviewed him there 2 or 3 times. And I asked him, I said, were you nervous, at all? Because he was an experienced pilot. I said, were you nervous at all? And he's like, no. And then he looks at me and he goes, no, I'm not going to lie. My knees were kind of jumping. My knees were kind of jumping. I said, yeah, I bet they were.
Was he one of the quartet that was at the museum in 2015? Yeah, 07. That's right, 07. That's what.
07, yeah. I brought Dave Jones. Dave Jones was there.
Doolittle's co-pilot was there, I remember.
Dick Cole.
Yeah.
Cole was there. Damn, who else? Thatcher, maybe?
I can't remember. There were only 5 of them alive at that point, and 4 of them were there in New Orleans. Yeah. And that, for me, and I was, that was the first time I'd actually ever come to the museum. That was my first panel there. And I remember I was sitting up in the front row in front of those Doolittle Raiders, and I'm sitting next to Gerhard Weinberg. I was just like, oh my God. And Gerhard was actually really nice to me. That was amazing for me. So anyway.
Yeah, Gerhard's a good dude. Yeah. But there was Jacob DeShazer was one of the other ones. Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
So there's an interesting story about Davey, and we can get to that in just a few minutes. And when we see his airplane launch, we can. But the other cat that I wanted to point out is this dude right here.
Yeah.
He stands out like a sore thumb because these are all Army, and he's even off to the side.
Right.
And whether that's intentional or not, I don't frankly know. But this, you can clearly see he's wearing aviator greens. He's got his Navy wings right here. This is Hank Miller. This is the guy that trained the Raiders on how to take off of an aircraft carrier.
Okay.
This is the dude.
Okay.
Miller was at the time of the raid, he was a flight instructor at Ellison Field, which is why they went to Ellison Field to do their short carrier takeoffs and all this other jazz.
Mm-hmm.
And he was just picked to be their flight instructor and tell them, this is how the Navy does things, and this is how you're going to have to do it when you get aboard the carrier. Yeah. Well, he goes and he puts them through their ringer, and he was supposed to stay at Ellison Field. He wasn't supposed to, when his job was done there, he was supposed to stay there.
Yeah.
Well, Doolittle comes up to him and says, hey, you're thank you, but you're done here, and we're going to go over to the West Coast now, and when we get over there, there's going to be another naval officer who's going to, not retrain per se, but just go over everything again. Well, Miller says, well, you know what, Colonel, I have a problem with this. And Doolittle's like, what do you mean you got a problem with this? And he says, this is a matter of professional pride. I taught these guys what to do. And I know damn good and well that when you go over to the West Coast, this other clown, whoever he is going to teach them the complete opposite of everything I told them. So It's just a matter of pride. I'd really like to go with you. And Doolittle's like, all right, fine. And they get orders cut, and Miller goes with them. Now, Miller was only supposed to take off in Dick Joyce's crew number 10 airplane, demonstrate that it could be done off of the carrier deck of the Hornet, and basically ease the minds of the pilots and the crews.
Yeah.
And then fly to South Carolina. And as we know, the mechanical issue. And that's why he gets stuck on Hornet and rides all the way out there.
That's amazing.
So there he is. And Miller had a pretty interesting career after the Doolittle Raid. He winds up becoming CAG of Air Group 23, flying off the USS Independence.
Yeah.
He takes the Rabaul raid. That's him. He leads Independence's Air Group into Rabaul in November 43.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And then he is CAG for Air Group 6 off of USS Hancock in 1945. So he sees the war literally from the beginning to the end.
Right. We should be able to identify the cruiser if we were any damn good.
I think that's, we know what we're talking about. I think that's USS Nashville.
Okay. Because
Nashville was one of the cruisers that we talked about a couple of weeks ago when FDR builds the Navy in 1934, 36, 38.
Right.
But Nashville was on the Doolittle Raid. I believe she was part of this task group. Let's do a little real time here.
Real time history. I love it.
Yeah.
It's our hallmark.
Yeah. USS Nashville. Nope, not that Nashville. CL-43. Yeah, she is. Yeah. Mm-hmm. She's part of, that is Nashville, because she is part of, part of Hornet's escort. So she is part of Hornet's screen. That is USS Nashville.
Cleveland class. Great ships. Ooh.
So here we are back aboard Hornet. And as you can see, one of the hallmarks of the Doolittle Raid, you talked about this just a few minutes ago, is that the weather in the North Pacific is not good.
This is the reason the Japanese used it as an approach route to Pearl Harbor, because it's, very few vessels up here.
It's, look at the wind just kicking ass down that flight deck. The guys' jackets are blowing back and everything else. And then the previous shot, everything's wet. It's been raining.
Yep.
Just atrocious weather.
Got some bombs coming up.
This shot was used in a lot of newsreels during the war because of the obvious, glory shot of bringing a bomb up the elevator here on the Hornet. And then they're going to load it up in the airplane. But the significance of this bomb specifically, as you're going to see in just a second, of what everybody probably knows, is that Doolittle and Mark Mitcher tie the Japanese peace medals to the tail fin of this bomb right here.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that is precisely what they're doing here. So again, this is all the Raiders. I'm not going to sit here and try and pick out faces and names. It's beyond my ability, frankly, at this point. But this is Captain at the time, Mark Mitcher.
Yep.
He's skipper of Hornet, and of course, this is Jimmy Doolittle. Mitcher's giving him the peace medals. And of course, all these guys are, they've got these huge grins because they know all about what this is all about.
Right.
We're going to return your peace medals.
Yeah, we don't need these anymore.
Please this is an artifact of an earlier time. Yes, this is an artifact of an earlier time.
Yes.
So Mitcher, John, we've talked about Mark Mitcher before, and ad nauseum through 44 and 45. But in 1942, when this is taken, he was not. There's the medals here tied to the bomb itself.
Nice.
He was not the same guy that we know in 44 and 45. You have a very strong opinion of Mitcher in 42.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of Mitcher in 42, mostly just because of gun decking his reports at Midway, and I make the somewhat controversial claim that it's Mark Mitcher that's responsible for the sinking of the Yorktown, that if he had just sent his air group out on the right route, we would have won that battle 4-zip by lunchtime, and the Japanese never would have gotten the counterattack in. So, yeah, not a big fan of Mark, but it's all good. That's interesting, though.
Yeah. Of course, Doolittle gets the honors.
Yep. Yeah, you're carrying the bombs. Yeah, you get to pin them on. He's not that big a guy, is he? Just a little dude.
He's a little bitty guy. This guy right here behind him was not. That you talked about Richard Cole. There he is. That's him.
Okay.
Right there. That's him. And of course, Cole is going to be Doolittle's co-pilot and crew number 1.
And the last surviving member of the raid.
Yep. Almost kind of appropriately so,
Yeah.
All right, now here's the launch. This is quite evident what this is right here. This is the launch. And again, per Navy regs, every freaking reel of this stuff is completely out of sequence. If you go back and you look,
love it.
I swear, it's like they do this on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
If you look, there's hardly anybody here.
Yeah, right. They've launched a bunch of these planes.
Yeah. Most of these guys are already gone. And some
How
of the
long did you say the launch cycle for this was? The better part of an hour?
59 minutes.
Good Lord.
Yeah.
Okay.
59 minutes to be exact, which again, it kind of goes back to what we were talking about American flight operations, carrier operations in 1942. We took a long time to do everything.
Yeah.
And admittedly, we're launching B-25s off of a friggin' aircraft carrier. So, I mean, it's a little bit of a different breed of cat, but still, it's
even so. Yeah, because if you're tail end Charlie, of course, you know this is a famous shot. Everybody's seen this.
Yeah.
You know, that the defenses are going to be alerted by the time you get there.
Yeah, I mean, you these planes, and that was another thing, and you'll see this in the footage too. They don't group up into a big squadron; they just go.
It's a bomber stream, is what it is. A little mini bomber stream.
I remember when we were doing the petrol show, we were trying to find relics of the Doolittle Raid on the wreck of the Hornet. And I was able to pull this out of the flight deck. And of course, Hornet was the only one of the Yorktown class carriers that had these two markings. And this was specifically for the Doolittle Raid. This is for the left wheel. This is for the nose wheel. It was so the pilots could keep that sucker straight as an arrow down our flight deck.
Okay. Didn't know that.
And if you're watching some of the close-up shots, you'll see it. I mean, they're on it. They're on those lines.
Yeah. You can also see there's water on the flight deck. I mean, the weather is just wretched.
Yeah, it's terrible. Yeah. Absolutely terrible.
That's a real pucker moment, though.
Yeah. That's what I was saying about Jones, about Dave Jones, is that he, you know, this guy was supremely confident, not bordering on arrogant or anything like that, but he was supremely confident in his ability as a pilot.
Right.
And when I asked him if he was nervous about taking off for the Doolittle Raid, you know, and he had to rethink it for a second, and he says, yeah, my knees were jumping a little bit.
Look at the headwind there and I'm
glad you said that, and I'm glad you pointed that out, because, you know, that was one of the big questions as to whether or not the carrier and the wind could provide enough lift to get the B-25s off the deck, heavily loaded. And of course, they added more fuel because now they're farther out from Japan than they wanted to be when they launched. So there's literally cans of gas inside the airplanes. Was there going to be enough lift? And the weather was so damn terrible. I don't know what the wind speed was, but as you see,
she's coming off the deck, you know, well before the end of the. And look at that, just and then back down again, you know. Yeah.
I mean,
there's plenty of relative wind.
Plenty of room here.
Yeah.
This is 2270. This is Whiskey Pete.
Whiskey Pete.
Great name too. Great name. This is crew number 3. It was flown by a guy named Bob Gray. So that's Whiskey Pete there taking off. But look at this. The damn nose wheel is up, and she just started moving.
Already,
Plenty of room here. That's Whiskey Pete again from a different angle.
Okay.
You can see she's riding just offside of the white or yellow lines, actually.
She goes.
So this pan here, this is pretty cool. You can tell which plane this is by the number that's left on it. This is Davy Jones. This is David Jones, and every time I see this shot, it makes me think that, you know, my knees were jumping section. Jones is he was essentially Doolittle's operations officer, if you will, for the raid. He's actually the one that gave Jimmy Doolittle his check ride in a B-25 out in California when they got out there. And then Jones is another one of those guys that when he gets to China, you know, they bail out. He winds up meeting up with Doolittle, I think the following day or maybe 2 days afterwards, I forget. There's pictures of them standing outside of a cave, and there's Jimmy Doolittle standing there with a bunch of crew members, and there's Jones, because he's huge, standing in the background. Can't miss him. He was a big dude.
Yeah.
And later on, the interesting thing about Jones is he is one of those guys that does get shipped back to the U.S. because he was one of the senior officers within the raid structure.
Right.
And, you know, Doolittle obviously go back, and several others too. Jones goes over to the Med, and he starts flying operations out of North Africa in 1943 and flying B-25s again. And he's shot down captured by the Germans, and he's thrown in Sagan, which is, of course, the prison camp. If you've ever seen The Great Escape,
yeah,
that's where it happens.
Okay.
And when he's in Sagan, he meets up with a couple other American aviators who were shot down. One of them's name was Robert Ingram, who was shot down over Dieppe, and during the Dieppe raid, shot down in a Spitfire. Jones and Ingram are two Americans who dig tunnels during the Great Escape.
Oh, interesting.
Okay. Which he told me that, and I'm like, you got to be kidding me.
Right.
No lie. He did not make the escape.
Right.
Because the Americans were transferred out of that section, and it became all British. But Davy Jones was one of the tunnel diggers during the Great Escape, which is just freaking cool.
Okay, so if you freeze here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah, we got 9. It looks like 9 back on the deck. And you were saying that he was crew number 10. Is that
5?
Oh, 5. Okay, so I must be miscounting. I must not be seeing all of the planes. Anyway.
I think there's another one. Like right here.
Yeah, right.
You see how these are all like angled?
Right.
And the two on the very edge of the flight deck on the stern are straight. You see, you got your twin tail booms here, and I think that's the other end of the tail boom for the other 25 right here.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right, I'll buy it.
2283. 83? Yeah, 2283. That's who that is. Yeah, look at the flag, man. Just like, come on, let's go. Come on.
Dude,
today.
On. Hey.
Today.
Hey.
So each 25 when she launched, and again, I'm pulling this off a straight memory, and this is a cool freaking shot right here.
Mm-hmm.
There was something going on. They had to calibrate their compasses.
Okay.
There was, I don't want to say too much and be wrong, but there was some sort of issue with the compasses in the aircraft, and what they had to do was get their relative bearing off of Hornet's course.
Oh.
And the only way they could correctly do that was to
do
fly
a circle around.
Exactly.
And come back over. And that's why we had that shot of her going overhead. Got it.
Is exactly who that is. If that's Jimmy Doolittle, I don't know. I have no earthly clue. Of course, he was the first one to do this, so it's possible that it is, but I frankly have no idea.
Right.
But that's exactly why these guys are zipping right over Hornet's flight deck, is they're getting their bearings.
Yeah.
And of course, you can see there's one of them that just did that, and here comes another one that's launching. So they're all taking off, whipping around, and going right back over Hornet to calibrate their compasses off of Hornet's bearing and head towards Japan.
Neat.
Yeah. It really was, like I said, it was one of the, and okay, we'll pause it. It's so one of those, cool. I know.
Yeah.
It's one of those iconic moments in American history. And it, the overall military effect on the Doolittle Raid can be debated, and we will when we get to that point. But again, just the sheer daring do of the whole raid is just something magical about it. Really is.
Yeah. Look at those seas. Oh, yeah. Hornet just pitching there.
Mm-hmm.
How low down. This is obviously early in the launch cycle. You can see a lot of 25s on the back end of the flight deck there.
Yeah. Yeah, you can see them all right here.
Yeah.
And I was going to say this was shot from Enterprise, but in the next shot, that kind of gives it away, because here's the Gorton's fisherman, or better known as William F. Halsey. Sorry, but doesn't he look like the Gorton's fisherman? He does.
Oh my God. Yep.
Yeah.
Right, you are. That's beautiful.
Yeah. But yeah, all this is shot from the Big E. There were cameramen. There he is again.
There is Bill.
Yeah. There were cameramen all over the task force shooting this thing.
Heck yeah.
And ironically enough, there's only about 10 reels of footage that survived. Where the hell it all else went, I have no idea.
Right. Oh, those shots are just amazing.
Watch the lift on this.
Yes, way up there, and then
blah.
Yeah. These are not calm air.
And this is not slowed down either. By the way, this is not slow motion footage. That is real time.
Yeah. Bill thinking to himself, can't they take off any faster so we can get out of here?
That was foremost in his mind.
Yeah,
Let me get the hell out of here.
Right. There's one of those, coming back around to set up its compasses, right?
We got another, I think we got another shot of some more of them launching here, but this is from Enterprise's vantage point. Here comes another one here. And what's interesting here too is that it's not just Enterprise again. You know, she's the duty carrier. She's got anti-submarine patrol. She's got combat air patrol. Here they are.
Right.
Because these aircraft are significantly smaller than this B-25.
For sure.
So that's, are those SBDs or?
Way.
Yeah, get the hell out of the way, get up and move.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, it really is. It's amazing footage.
Yeah.
It's super, super cool stuff. So I'm going to scrub through a little bit of it here. And again, so John Ford was on USS Salt Lake City, but he had cameramen, including the guy that shot a lot of the footage for December 7th, Greg Toland, Arthur Arling. They were stationed throughout the fleet. I don't know who was on which ship, but he instructed them, make sure you get some glory shots too. That's why there's shots of Halsey. And then there's shots like this that are completely staged.
Right.
But it's also part of the whole strike back at Japan thing, you know.
This is a propaganda effort, let's be clear.
Very much so. Very much so.
And much needed.
Especially at this time in the war. April 18th, 1942, man. Everything was south.
Yeah, everything is dark. What a cool shot.
Mm-hmm. Look at that.
Yeah.
Barfo-Rama.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting stuff, to be sure. There's another shot in here that I put and I wanted to show. Again, it's just more of the same. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So here we go. Here's right after the event. You know, she's still launching, but now this is definitely Hornet, and her decks are empty for all intents and purposes. She's actually already received some of the SBDs. Of course, she did have some aircraft in her hangar, her own aircraft that she did bring up. Some of, I think it's VB8 that was aboard her at the time.
Okay.
But yeah, now some of those guys are up on deck now. So let's move through some of this and get to some of the other footage that we have. Okay, here we go. So we talked about Bobby Hite and Bill Farrow and Spots and the rest of their crew as they're captured by the Japanese. This is the Japanese propaganda reel that talks about that very thing.
The air raids on the territory of the Empire of Japan, enemy air crew within control. There was an act of iniquity at someplace. The Blue will be submitted to a military legal committee and sentenced to death or severe punishment will be meted out to me. I am the father of the Manchuria nation. Air raids on the operational area and into our compound, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, sorry. Google Translate is not perfect.
Interesting. Well, what you're going to see next is the result of that very thing, what you're talking about here. So the Japanese, as we said, they captured Bauer's crew, and not Bauer's crew. I'm sorry, Farrow's crew, and bring them along. Of course, you know, they're under the blindfolds, bringing them over to the United States. This is Jacob DeShazer here, whom you met.
Not to the States.
Oh, not to the States. I'm sorry, my bad. Good God, what am I saying? They wish to Christ they were in the States. Yeah. They're bringing them to Japan. This footage is very, very famous. This is Robert Hite. This is the co-pilot here. Yeah. And these guys, as we said, two of them were executed. DeShazer and Haidt wind up surviving. They do live through the war in prison camps. They're rescued out of China in 45 at the very end of the war. If I remember correctly, he's going to be executed via samurai sword. If I remember correctly, I could be wrong, but I don't think I am. This is Robert Haidt, the gentleman you saw with the blindfold over his face when he's pulled out of the Japanese aircraft. And these are some very unfortunate souls that are going to spend eternity in Japan, and then other ones that are going to spend the next 3 years in China. So this is another little interesting little aspect. This is at the very end after everything has taken place. Obviously, this is the raiders that were still in China receiving medals from Madame Chiang Kai-shek.
Madame Chiang.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course, there's Jimmy there. There's Madame Chiang right there.
Madame Chiang, arguably the most powerful and influential woman of the entire Second World War.
And of course, there's the man himself.
Yep. Yeah.
And that, as they say,
is that.
That's
neat.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty cool. I'm glad we were gonna toss up between the Doolittle Raid and what would we say, the Marshall Islands Raid. I'm glad you chose the Doolittle Raid because that's some pretty cool stuff.
No, that was really neat. You and your infinite quantities of archival footage. I just kind of like it. Yeah.
Just wait. Wait.
Barely scratch the surface.
We did. And I've got a lot more later war stuff than we have early war stuff. So you got anything else you want to add to this one?
No, sir.
Cool. Yeah. I thought this one was cool. I know there's a lot of people that have been harping on us to do some Doolittle Raid stuff, which this is not it, but this is part of it. So hopefully this, get you your Doolittle Raid fix until we get to the point to where we do the Doolittle Raid itself.
Right.
So anyway, with that, we want to thank you very much for listening and or watching this episode of the Unauthorized History of the Pacific War podcast. Please give us a rating and review. We do appreciate it. If you got a question or comment, send us an email at unauthorizedpacificpodcast@gmail.com. My name is Seth Paridon. I want to thank you once again for listening and or watching. John, my friend, thanks for being here with us again, as always.
So enjoyable to be here, and thank you to our knowledgeable audience, and we'll see you all again next week.